It was a scorching summer day. The wife asked her husband, Dennis, to go to her mother-in-law's house in the country and help her with the chores. At first he refused, but soon the idea became incredibly attractive to him. Especially attractive was the prospect of eating fresh homemade milk, cucumbers, tomatoes, and other vegetable garden goodies. However, it was not the produce and not the cottage cheese that caused his decision. The main prey was his mother-in-law. He had long secretly admired her, and his desire unconsciously became stronger and stronger. His mother-in-law was a worthy woman, skillful in everything she did. She was well-groomed, beautiful, and always cheerful. Watching his mother-in-law stroll gracefully down the street, Dennis couldn't resist casting a lustful glance at her. He genuinely liked her, so why not seize the opportunity? With that thought in mind, he gathered his things into the car, said goodbye to his wife with a kiss, and hit the road. It wasn't a long drive, and he reached his destination in just 2 hours. His mother-in-law lived on the outskirts of a village with a forest beyond the fence. It was a secluded place where there was not a single person. Upon arrival, they greeted warmly and exchanged the customary kiss on the lips. A shiver ran down Dennis' spine. They entered the house, and Dennis, thoroughly refreshed, was ready to get on with his day. The mother-in-law was not greedy, feeding her son-in-law so much that he could barely get out of his chair. After a little rest, he went out into the yard and admired the beauty surrounding him. At that moment, he could not help but think that he could live happily with his mother-in-law forever, so pleasant was the nature around him. He started chopping wood and stacking it carefully, not realizing that his mother-in-law was watching him from behind the curtain. She looked out the window and quickly disappeared, but eventually Dennis caught her gaze. This fact lifted his spirits, and he began to indulge in crazy dreams. He imagined entering the house and being greeted by his mother-in-law, who prepared a clean bed for him. In his fantasies, she would even join him in bed. They will surrender to their desires and be happy, and there will be whatever happens. When Dennis entered the house, however, he found it empty and quiet, with only the cat watching him intently. He called for his mother-in-law, but there was no answer. She finally appeared at the front door and explained that she preferred to sleep in the hayloft because of the heat. Dennis accepted her explanation without further question and wished her good night. Despite his reluctance to sleep, he washed his face and climbed into bed, staring at the ceiling. Sinful thoughts swarmed in his head, especially about the intimate moments he imagined sharing with his mother-in-law. However, how can I be the first to act? What if she takes offense? What if she slaps me in the face? What if she tells her daughter? Then it will be even worse. My wife will kill me. What am I supposed to do? Dennis was very tired as he had only slept half the night. He was restless and full of anger. He had a decision to make. We are not children. We are adults. We need to take action. He stood up, looked at himself in the mirror, and smoothed his hair with his hands. The excitement inside him was growing. He crept quietly into the hayloft. He looked around warily, as if someone was sneaking up on him. He sighed. With a creak, he opened the wooden door. Nothing could be seen in the darkness. Only a mouse squeaked somewhere. Dennis's heart pounded like a stray animal. Even his own ears were filled with the sound of his heartbeat. He spread the rustling hay with his hands and looked around. His eyes were gradually getting used to the darkness. His mother-in-law was nowhere to be seen. He continued creeping forward, trying to tread as quietly as possible so as not to frighten her. He sneezed unintentionally. The grass was so prickly, it tickled his nostrils and mouth. "Son-in-law, is that you?" He heard his mother-in-law's voice. "It's me. Who else would it be?" He answered in a hoarse voice, overflowing with excitement. "Can't you sleep?" "I can't sleep, mother-in-law." "Is it because you're thinking of me?" she asked, laughing. "About you. Only about you," he answered firmly. "Yes, and I am tired of waiting for you, my favorite son-in-law." The The mother-in-law whispered softly among the dry grass, and her voice was scarcely audible. At last he discerned her. She was lying on the hay, spreading her arms invitingly. Her gaze was playful, like a cat playing with a mouse. For a moment his son-in-law felt fear. It had been a long time since he had felt such feelings, except in his youth. But the mother-in-law remained unperturbed. Although at first she was embarrassed, her hesitation dissipated. They shared a long kiss, and from that moment Dennis could remember nothing else. The only thing he remembered was the pungent smell of grass, reminiscent of the forest witch's dwelling. He struggled to breathe, barely regaining consciousness. As he stepped out of the hayloft, he saw the moonlit sky and the silence with no one in sight. At that moment, he felt an overwhelming sense of contentment and happiness. As he looked up at the night sky, he let out a roar like that of a wild stallion. The next evening, having finished their daily chores, they returned to the hayloft again. The first to enter was the mother-in-law, followed a short time later by the son-in-law. And everything unfolded the same way as the first time, only this time it was even better. He himself could not imagine that a man could experience real happiness. It is not without reason that they say that a mature woman is better than a young girl. Dennis thought about it. He had no remorse. It was not his fault that they were drawn to each other with such inexplicable force. It was an element, a longing between two people of opposite sexes that was far from ordinary. The fire consumed all of his insides, leaving his mind calm and empty. The thought of returning to the city, to his wife and children, was unbearable. The mere prospect of it made him want to howl with despair. How was he to forget what had happened the night before? Dennis was at a loss. His anger was so strong that he wanted to tear the hair out of his chest. And then his wife started calling, and repeatedly. "Come home," she said. "You're spending too much time there." How to go home? "We need to make new greenhouses, repair the roof, stone the path to the doorstep, thin the branches of the apple trees. I'll be busy with work for a week for sure." Dennis sighed, pretending to be tired, "But I'm ready to do anything for your mother, my favorite wife." She was delighted with such words, and bragged about me to her friends. She didn't know that it was not work that kept me busy, but her mother. We did all sorts of things in that delicious-smelling dry grass. If I told my friends about it, they'd find it unbelievable. It's like we've lost our minds. There's no other way to describe it. Dennis continued to stay with his mother-in-law for another week, and then a few more days. No matter how hard they tried, they couldn't bring themselves to break up. Their love was too strong. However, he had no choice but to return home, even though he didn't want to. At home, Dennis felt incredibly depressed, and even his wife couldn't dispel his depression, not even at night. He longed for those days spent in the hayloft with his beloved mother-in-law.